There you go. Go with it.
Hello, Fatherhood. I am psyched. Can you believe it? Second interview in like the last 3 hours, and my guest, camera left, is the unstoppable Casey Palmer, also known as, I don't know, hashtag @ Canadian Dad, who's Casey, what lovely city in Canada are you in?
I'm from Toronto, our biggest city of all.
Absolutely. We just love our Canadian friends. I live in Seattle, so we're neighbors, sort of.
Sort of. Kind
like our countries are somewhat close together, and yet you and I are plane rides apart. And so Casey's joining me in another episode of this ongoing series that we're calling Dad's Making a Difference. And this is an opportunity for me to really connect with dad bloggers across the world. We've now had bloggers from other countries. Casey's from Canada. Danny Gray was from the UK. I've got other folks. I think Christopher McGuire is going to be coming in from the UK as well. It's going to be super great. I am so looking forward to it. And this is an opportunity to shine a light on the great work that dads are doing by being out there and sharing their story about who they are as a dad, how dadhood affects them, inspiring other dads, inviting them to participate, and sometimes online, sometimes in person. But it's in this area, like I want to remind all of the dad bloggers out there who are watching that you guys are all, this is cutting edge stuff. Like it's easy to see when we don't do this all, for people who do this all the time, it kind of feels normal, but this is still cutting edge stuff in our society. And I'm super excited to have Casey here to tell us both about his experience and his background and his journey, but also what it's like, what he notices might be different about being a Canadian-based dad blogger from being a US-based dad blogger. So all that being said, that's way too much intro. Casey, why don't we start out? Just tell us about your family. That's a great place to start.
Sure. So I guess I usually segment it into a few different kinds of family. There's the family I was born with, the family I created, and then the family I chose. So I'm guessing this is the one we created, the one I live with all the time and have to take care of. So my wife and I live on the east side of, I guess, downtown Toronto with our two young kids, 2 boys, age 4 and 2. And we're just out there trying to, I guess, disprove a lot of people who live in the Toronto area and think that you can't raise a child in Toronto itself. When people have kids over here, they tend to move out to the suburbs around Toronto where it's safer and quieter and all that kind of stuff. But when we got married 7 years ago, we just felt that it was where we wanted to be. We wanted to be in the middle of things. We wanted to have access to opportunities, services, things like that. And yeah, it's a little rowdier being in an urban environment, but I think kids are very flexible and adaptable. They just figure it out.
I love that you share that because James Green, who's a New York City dad, we have a lot of New York City dad bloggers who are aware of this conversation, revel in the fact that they're raising a family in an urban area. They're completely uninterested in escaping all the richness of a city life. So what are some of the favorite things that you and your family do to take advantage of all this great stuff you have around you in Toronto?
Well, Toronto's a little unique. We have a lot of green space where you can go out to a park in the spring, summer, fall. You can toboggan in the winter. There's a lot of awesome hills. We're actually just east of a nice ravine, so when they get older and they can handle steep hills on their own, like we'll just leave them to it. But Toronto is definitely one of the more diverse and most multicultural cities anywhere. So especially through the summertime, you have a variety of festivals. You have Taste of India, you have Caravana, where we celebrate all of our Caribbean cultures. You have a huge parade for Greek Independence Day. Like, you can literally go to different sections of the city and experience a completely different Toronto based on wherever you are. And that's one of the main reasons why we felt it was important to raise kids here, because we want them to be global children. And even when they can't be out traveling from place to place, we still want them to have access to those cultures.
Right. See, I love it, right? Like, I hear dads who live rurally And I love also hearing urban stories because there's no right way to do it. It's just making what you choose right, like taking advantage of what you have. And, whether you're living a rural life where we're reveling in the lifestyle or the activities that you can do, or you're living in an urban setting like Casey's doing, it seems like just taking advantage of whatever you have available to you is really what matters more than anything else.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, that's been our huge driver to just keep us going. So.
Yeah. So tell me, what inspired becoming a dad blogger?
I'm one of those weird situations where I was blogging before that. I started up in the huge boom of Twitter in Toronto back in about 2010, 2011, where we just kind of got together, found out other people who use Twitter, and we're just out all the time as being a man about town. And I think it was about 3 years into that where we had our first son, and things changed entirely. I was thinking at the time, I'm going to be too busy to handle this side of my life now. And I had a good friend tell me, he's like, you know what? How about you just try dad blog and see how that turns out? And it's been interesting. I've been able to chronicle from the day my boys were born up till now, see the changes, go back and look at who I was then versus now, and the understanding I have of parenting now because of that. And it's been informative, educational, bewildering, all at the same time.
Yeah. Yes. Parenting, bewildering. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And what I so appreciate is from visiting your site is your work is super rich, and it just speaks to the fact that you've really been in this sort of sharing yourself and sort of exploring what it means to be Casey out in the world for longer than most dad bloggers have, just because you've been writing for so long.
Yeah, it's been about 7 years with the blog itself and 15 years in total sharing online, and not slowing down anytime soon. I'm hoping I can keep doing it another 10, 20 years until my kids are adults, and I've got through the growing pains of them saying, stop writing about us. I'm like, no, I'm going to keep writing about you because you will love it when you're about 30 and look back on it and be like, hey, my entire life is here. But we'll deal with those issues when they come.
Yeah. It's just one day at a time, people. Just taking parenthood and fatherhood one day at a time. So I'm clearly you must just run into dad bloggers in Toronto all the time.
I wish that were the case. Most dad bloggers in Toronto area, like I said before, people when they have kids, they move out of Toronto. They move out to the suburbs. So a lot of the dad bloggers around here live out in suburbs that are probably like anywhere from 30 minutes to about a 2-hour drive away, depending on where they are. In Toronto itself, I have to do a current tally. I know someone just moved out to the burbs recently. So I think there's probably 2, 3 of us in Toronto in a city of 2.8 million, which is a little insane. So I always encourage any dads who feel like they want to share their voice in Toronto, like, come join us, because there's so much to tell and so many diverse experiences. And if I'm the one who's loudest, I mean, I'm the only one who's sharing my story, but I know that not everyone's story looks like mine at all. So.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah. And, in areas where like you get to dominate because there's so few of you in Toronto, but even in places like New York City, there are a lot of voices, but there are endless numbers of ears. Would you say Toronto has 2.8 million people?
Yes.
2.8 million people and just a couple of dad bloggers in that area. Wow. That's huge. That's huge. So I'm curious, from a non-American blogger, dad blogger perspective, what do you think distinguishes? I see that you're Casey Palmer, Canadian dad. How do you see being a Canadian dad as distinct?
I think from a global perspective, people have a very unique expectation of Canadians, whether there's, some of the more stereotypical stuff where, I know there's still those who think we all live in igloos and it's like, snowy all the time and maybe we're like almost like a backward society and things like that. But at the same time, then there's the individuals who know about, the fact that there's a lot of nice people in Canada. And I don't want to say that people see us as soft necessarily, but I feel like Canada gets a very interesting reputation across the board when it comes down to just what people think about Canadians. So what I think I'm trying to express through the blog as a Canadian dad is that there is no one thing as a Canadian dad. Like I do everything from sometimes I'm here, sometimes I'm abroad, sometimes I am, playing basketball, sometimes I'm taking the kids to the pool. There's a variety of experiences available. And I think I almost say it's almost like a reverse US. Because with the U.S. population, it's I think the way the demographics work out. I'm a huge stats guy, so bear with me for a second. But I think you're about 80% rural and 20% metropolitan when it comes down to your breakdown of population. Where we are 80% urban and 20% rural. There's like a huge amount of open space that's not used in Canada just because like everyone's flocked to these urban centers. And that has kind of molded Canadian mentalities where it's there's almost like Torontonians sadly tend to think that they're the center of the universe. It's a thing that happens here. So they think that Toronto is representative of what all of Canada looks like when it's couldn't be further from the truth. If you explore anywhere outside of Canada, you'll realize that there's so many different things in just our own nation. And I think that's what I'm trying my best to show, that Canada has so many different faces and lifestyles associated with it, and it's up to us to make sure we show them all, not just one.
Oh, that's so great. And how has that impacted your writing? Like as a dad, what do you like? What's that distinction for you?
It's I like thinking about it as an intergenerational experience where my parents, they came from Jamaica and they had to work really hard to make sure we could get the right schooling and have the right resources, etc. And because of that, they didn't get to see a lot of Canada. We sometimes go back to Jamaica to visit family or visit family in different places in Canada, the U.S., but they didn't really have the opportunity to explore Canada for leisure. Excuse me. So now that I have myself and I'm, doing okay, I have my wife and my kids, I want them to know that Canada is so diverse, and that affects my writing because my writing is primarily for my kids. It works out well that I have an audience and people who want to check it out and listen, but ultimately I'm writing to capture things for my kids so that years down the road they can understand why I made the certain choices I did in raising them. And part of that is to build an appreciation for just what Canada means to them. And I want to make sure that they have enough broad and diverse experiences of what Canada looks like so that when they have to come and define that and make their own decisions, they'll be doing it from an informed standpoint. But it's going to take, it's almost like a long-term social experiment with my children to make sure that I'm giving them all the pieces they need to, be well-informed adults. But we'll see.
I love it. I love the vision of being really clear about where you came from and what the opportunity and possibility was, and taking that sort of next step for your kids. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's very cool. I'm curious. You've been writing for a while. Has writing as a dad blogger impacted you differently than the blogging you were doing before you became a dad blogger?
Yes. It's
great.
Well, wow. I think getting there. No worries. I think it's richer now. I think the everything I put together has a greater sense of purpose than it did before. Before, it was like you go to an event and you're basically going home and writing something to explain the details of what happened. You're like, okay, then A happened, then B happened, then C happened, and there you go. That's your blog post. But now it's more, what are the impacts and ramifications of things that happen and decisions they make and the things they do, conversations I have? What are the broader reaching impacts of those things? A big example of this is, so for every Black History Month, I have a series called Tales from the 2.9. It's based on the fact that 2.9% of the Canadian population is Black. So I write, in the past 2 years I've done it's being very individual focused. So I profile 28, 29 different Black Canadians and what they're doing, ask them standard set of questions, and put that together. But what happened this year is that now I'm doing 28 different themes. I want to write 28 different themes and have different experts and everything come in to talk about different aspects of Black Canadian culture. And it's only through growth that I kind of got to this point where it's like I want to create things that are meaningful, that help others, that teach my kids right from wrong and things like that. And I think it's my children that keep me anchored, keep me striving to continue to do better things, things that have way more purpose to them than I would have before. I think I don't know if I was necessarily a shallow person before kids, but I know definitely that I take time to really think about what it is I'm trying to put out to the world now in comparison.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And thanks so much for mentioning the piece around the 2.9 blog, because I don't know if everybody else has noticed, but you and I are slightly different skin shades. And that may not have been noticed for most people. Well, I won't add anything onto it. How has being a Black Canadian impacted dad blogging?
It's a little different for me. Yeah. I mean, considering that I don't know, it's a layered answer. So we kind of have already underlying stereotype, if you will, of Black dads not being present in the picture. There's a lot of research on it. There's a lot of documentation that goes towards just, whether it's due to incarceration or context, like environmental context and things like that. It's really hard to come across consistent, positive, reinforcing messages of Black fatherhood from, kind of what's out there. And it kind of puts a lot of pressure on myself. Like I'm putting the pressure on myself to make sure that I can put together something that really speaks to what I'm doing and how intentional I'm being about being present for my kids and making sure that I'm teaching them to have a good moral compass, things of that nature. It's probably colored, a lot of interactions and opportunities I've had. I have to say that I consider the journey I've had as a dad blogger to be particularly blessed. I've been able to do many things and go many places I don't think I ever saw myself going to. How much of that has to do with race, I don't know. But at the same time, because I'm in such a unique position, I feel like it allows me to speak on issues that maybe many others shy away from. So when it comes down to having opinions on race relations, and when it comes down to being able to have hard discussions on everything from sexuality to, how we raise our kids, one person versus another person. I'm kind of just a one lone individual voice, but it seems to have worked out without, blowing up in my face too many times that I don't want to do it anymore. So right. It's proven unique. And I think it's something that will continue to do so until you get, a younger, faster model of myself who will just take over the reins and be like, hey, so you're yesterday's news, get out of here. But for now, it's working out rather well. I think it's part of my identity. I think I hadn't really embraced it as much in the past as I do now. And now that I have, mixed race children who are going to eventually have to figure themselves out, my 4-year-old has started to identify that his dad is Black, but he doesn't quite know what mom is. She's Dutch. She's like, he doesn't have a modifier to characterize, white people. It's just something for him. It's like, I see you guys everywhere, but dad's unique. So it's really an odd thing I'm trying to characterize and wrap my head around, but I think it's important to take it head on and really bring it into the discussion as much as I can.
Oh, I love that, right? Like I love, bringing it forward as a conversation, not only for other dads to take a look at, but for your kids to take a look at as well, because they're going to have to figure out for themselves what that looks like. And that's one of the things I'm trying to be super intentional about, is being as transparent as appropriate with what goes on for me, so that my kids get an idea of what it might actually look like to be an adult, or some of the things that we have to deal with. And I'm just so psyched for that. Now, does your readership sort of follow you? Are you sort of, is your readership reflective of your presentation? I mean, are most of your readers Black? Are they across the board? Like, how does that play out for you?
From what I've seen, I'd say most of my readers are non-Black, but I think this has been the first year I've seen where the Black community we have across the nation is just a lot more, I want to say, psyched for what the possibilities are. Now that we've had a couple of years of it proven, it's gotten national media attention. We've been able to really make a splash with it as of 2017. So now it's at a point where it's really starting to look like a tangible thing where we can say, okay, once a year, we're going to like put together all this digital content and really go out there and create something amazing, because the Tales from the 2.0 was spawned from a place where it felt like there was a bit of a, content void, where we didn't really see a lot of Black Canadian content around Black History Month online. You had school programs, you had library programs, you had, Black associations that would hold maybe like a one-day event to bring everyone together and talk about the history and celebrate where we've come as the people. But when it comes down to very intentional packaged digital content, it really just, we haven't seen it. And I think now we're just trying to raise the bar each year so that we can get as many people involved and polish it up as much as possible, so that by the time, you do this, 5-10 years out, it just becomes a standard thing that happens year over year. So right now it's still in its infancy. We're still learning and still putting things together, but I've made so many contacts and I'm starting to really get it to a point where we're starting to talk to people who are heads of state, CEOs of companies and things like that, who are starting to get way more interested in it. So yeah, it's looking to be something major.
Well, I love it. And I love that it's like a lighthouse, like it's a beacon online for a voice that may not otherwise be being heard. And I love it. And, I know this is true, right? Like at 2.9%, you have a very small population that's spread out over one of the largest landmass, single country land masses in the world. Yep. And it's not untrue also of other bloggers, because your perspective or your message is going to ring true for people who may feel all isolated, or they may feel like they're all by themselves and they're dying to hear something that is like that beacon or that lighthouse in the dark. So it seems like it's I can totally understand why it would feel like the bar is super high for you. And I just want to personally just tell you how psyched I am that you've been willing to take it on and not get stopped by that feeling.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's I never expected the bar to get as high as it is now. Now it's just kind of up there. I'm like, oh, hey, up there. Okay. To take care of this. And
yeah, I've seen your writing, dude. You don't have anything to worry about.
Thank you.
So, if you were going to categorize your blog, and somebody was like, "Well, tell me a little bit about your blog," and you were going to kind of give them that 1 minute or 30-second, like, this is what you should know about my blog, what would you say?
You know what? I've had to do this a number of times, so I have something for you. Okay. Here we go. So, Casey Palmer, Canadian Dad, writes about 4 verticals. There's travel, tech, food, and family. Those are the 4 things I cover best. And it's about a dad trying to raise his children in an urban environment and ensuring that they too can one day have their voice in a family brand. It's showing just the diversity of parenthood and showing that fatherhood is not one answer and not one thing. Yeah. That's kind of it.
God, that's right on, man. That's right on. Well practiced, sir.
Thank you.
I'm going off to my camera left here. I'm going to try and figure out mine. So Casey, I'm closing up all my interviews with this question. Is we're doing an Own Your Morning program coming up that's coming up for release, and I'm curious, what's one thing you do early in the morning or first thing in the morning that helps you set up to have a great day?
One thing I do early in the morning, especially if I have a good day. One of the first, I do the drop-offs for my kids in the morning. So my mornings are always kind of a whirlwind, but when we're sitting down at the table having breakfast, I try to engage them in questions that'll make them think. Kind of hard with a 2-year-old. Like, I don't expect much of him yet. But for the 4-year-old, I want to challenge his expectations, because he's a really smart kid. He often surprises me with what he already knows and the things he'll choose to question me on. And so I will bring up topics and words and concepts that will hopefully frame him for a day to really soak things up in his mind. And by doing that, I feel like I am giving him little pieces of me, because all of them are framed around, what I know and my experiences. I'm not going to research some book beforehand and say, okay, I'm going to quiz you on this today because I read it in a book last night. It's very much more like, here are things I know to be true in my life, and I'm going to, put them on the table for you and see what you think about them. And then sometimes he'll have an answer then, sometimes it'll be a week later, sometimes it just, nothing will bear fruit. But I just do it every day to try my best to, push them a little further every day.
Nice. A little like inspiring curiosity and oh, this is great. You're not the first nor the last. Well said, sir. Well said. Well, again, this has been another in the series about dads making a difference. Now, Casey, how should people connect with you? How should people follow you? Where do you want to send people so they can find out everything there is to know about Casey Palmer, Canadian Dad?
Well, CaseyPalmer.com is my URL, CaseyPalmer. Also my Instagram handle, same thing. And I somehow landed Case P on Twitter, CASEP. Don't know how that happened. It's amazing. It's 5 letters, easy to remember. And if you go to the website, you'll find all my URLs for everything else going on there, because I like to link them all together.
And give me Instagram one more time, will you? Is it Casey Palmer?
Palmer, full name. Just one word.
I just want to make sure we put it up on the screen so people don't miss it.
No worries. I appreciate it.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, that's my name.
There it is. So again, Casey Palmer, Canadian Dad, thank you so much for the generous use of your time. Go follow Casey. He rocks. We could do this all day, but I want to honor his time and yours. If you want to follow him, go shoot over there. Again, this has been another in the series of Dads Making a Difference. And thanks so much for being with us today, Casey.
Thank you.
All right, man. You take